Okay, so um, let's, I wanted to do a working session today. There's a few things that I wanted to just show you guys what I've been kind of learning and working on. Uh, if you followed the stream yesterday, then you know that I got a ukulele to learn music because I've been trying to teach myself music, and I know it lines up with my work. I've already seen enough of that to know that, and I mean, it was kind of inevitable anyways, but it's when you're not doing something firsthand, it's not, you don't know it. You're just memorizing, which is like what, everybody in academia is doing these days, unfortunately. That's cause of many problems in society right now and the scientific community. But uh, you have to be experiencing it. You have to have firsthand experience with a subject, not just reading it and memorizing it. So I got a ukulele to start really learning this instead of just memorizing the notes and frequencies and aspects of music and things like that. So if you have any tips on learning an instrument, please drop it in the chat. But what I've been also working on, because I got distracted as I found patterns, was looking at how the periodic table of elements relates to twin prime numbers. And so basically what I'm working on is this. So here's all the elements. And my work seems to suggest that there is basically probably 81, 80, or 80 stable elements. I think that's what my work seems to suggest, and that's because my cosmological verse model is made up of uh, 81 what I call quanta of consciousness, basically. Like it's like a conscious agent, and that's Donald Hoffman's word for it, basically. But that is in the model, and then they're separated by 64 gaps, which are really entanglement structures. There is no such thing as a gap in objectivity. There is no such thing as emptiness or nothingness. And this is why I have a problem with people calling, the space between space the vacuum, when they're like, oh, it's the vacuum energy or something like that. It's the entanglement energy. There is no vacuum. There is no nothingness. There's just relationships, and that's just, I mean, it's an inevitability. But one of the things that I was looking at is I was looking at atomic numbers here, and I have it listed here if it's a prime. And so you have twin prime numbers, which is when you have a prime number and then you have another number that comes next. So like 5 and then 6 and then 7. So 5 and 7 would be two twin prime numbers. And so is 11 and 13 and 17 and 19. I think that 0 and 2 are also twin prime numbers, and they also have a prime number between them, which is 1. I think in meta mathematics, 0 inevitably is a prime number. It's if 1 is the alpha, 0 is the omega, and they are still one structure, which means that it's the same. They are the same. So there's lots of other reasons why this is the case, but explaining meta mathematics is tough right now because it's so new. So but the rules changed. There is no empty set in objectivity because there is no nothingness. There's only somethingness. Only in subjectivity and relativity do you have nothingness. So, but we think that mathematics is subjective the way that it is, and it's actually not. It's just as subjective as every other field. It's just easier to apply across fields, then, you know, right now, for most people, applying sociology to engineering is more difficult for a lot of people than applying, algebra to engineering. But it's still a subjective field. It's not objective like everybody thinks it is. But there is an objective field, and that's the theory of everything space, the meta field, or whatever you want to call it. Theory of everyone. And or meta mathematics, you could call it. It's just, I don't know what to call it, but you get it. It's just the pattern that is the pattern, that is the only pattern. And in that space, 0 is infinity and 1 at the same time. And then you have 1, which is basically like, it's kind of tough to explain because it's just a circle. So 1 is the head of 0 and 0 is the head of 1. They're both the body of each other and the head of each other. Because it's literally like a loop of information processing. But it's inevitably a prime number, which means that 0 and 2 in metamathematics are a twin prime sequence. When you start looking at these numbers, it's fascinating which numbers pop up, because there's definitely some pattern going on. 72 is a very important number. 60 is a very important number. I think has the most divisors of any two-digit number. I think that's true. I need to double check that. 42 is a very important number mathematically. 31 is 30, 29. I mean, all of these are 19. Every single one. 108. 108 is fascinating because it's 1 times 1 and times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. I don't know what you would. I guess when you times something by 1, multiply something by 1, it's just, itself, obviously. But if you look at like numbermatics, you look at 108 right here, it'll say prime factorization of 108 is 2 squared times 3 cubed. So basically it's 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 times 3. And it's fascinating because you can see that it's like a self-referential structure. Every aspect of it is mirroring itself as the information is growing, because it's 2 squared and it's 3 cubed. What is missing here is you could also write it basically like this. You can be like equals 1 to the power of 1 times 2 to the power of 2 times 3 to the power of 3. People will disregard that 1 to the power of 1. But you can actually, and you can't do this in Excel, do something like maybe even like this if you're gonna like go super meta with it. But this will, yeah, exactly. It will just return an error because 0 represents infinity, and we don't have anything that can process infinity in a finite moment. It's literally impossible. So you can have Excel running on computers forever from here on out, and that is infinity. Infinity is just the increasing of quantity, and it's just the ever increasing amount of information, and that follows 2 aspects. There's a quantitative aspect to that and a qualitative aspect to that, but it's just replication infinitely. That's all infinity is. It's not. People get confused about infinity because they try and think about it as a finite number, even if they are not consciously aware that that's what they're doing. And if you do that, then yeah, it seems like out of reach and either non-existent or beyond you. But the reality is, it's very simple. It's just infinite growth. That's it. And so you can't have a compute, like, you can't write the equation that will involve infinity on a finite, structure like this, where I need an answer now. That's a finite moment. You can't express infinity in a finite moment. You have to do, like, just have this go forever and just let it go, which it won't even do. It's probably, yeah, it didn't even go very far. It's a MacBook Air. It doesn't have the power that I honestly need with all these spreadsheets. But there's no amount of power that is enough for for a structure within space-time to calculate things to infinity. It's just not possible. It's also necessary that infinity loops back around and forms cohesiveness of information and basically becomes oneness again, because otherwise it would be nothing. It's like every objective bit of information has to eventually be processed, which means you have to bring it back around and relate it. And if you try and do that with infinity, the way that we think about it often, it's just this infinite, number that just never ends. That's not even really infinity. Infinity is a finite and restrictive pattern that is repeated infinitely, but it is also limited because the pattern is finite. So that's why you can even have a theory of everything, because there's the rules are set in the universe, but then we can have another universe and another universe and another universe, or another aeon and another aeon and another aeon, but the pattern that each one follows is exactly the same. So it's a superposition of extremely constrained and also infinite growth, or finite structure, but infinite replication of that structure. But it's very, you need the context to understand that, and numbers themselves are not context. You have to put them into models that are, modeling the universe, or aspects of it at least. But this is fascinating. Twin prime numbers are fascinating. Prime numbers are definitely related to consciousness. If you think about what a prime number is something that is divisible only by one and by itself. Think about you. Who are you? You are you, yourself, and also all the information that makes you up. So whatever that amount of information is, you are only divisible by one because you are one sentient being, but you have a bunch of information that has led up to you being this one sentient being. So you are divisible by that and one. And consciousness is, it's inevitable that prime numbers are very linked to consciousness. I don't know how to, model that very much right now. I'm working on it, but it's very obvious. It's just also, that doesn't mean it's easy to explain or translate. But I can tell. It's obvious that I can tell there's something there. I'm not saying I understand it all yet, but I don't. But it's definitely, it's definitely there. It's pretty obvious when you think about consciousness that you are one and you are also a group of information. If you think about a prime number, like, I don't know, what's a prime number right here? 19. 19 is, there's 19 bits of information that lead up to 19, but it's also divisible by one because it's like this singular structure. But you need to put it into like models that contextualize things in order to link this to reality that's not abstract and more universally applicable. But when you are looking at things like this model where it's calculating and it ends up that when the input is 1, the interior sum is 19 on this model of basically what is, it's a sentient singularity, but there's a few different ways you could look at it. I call it a quantum of consciousness. I understand that's like it's a great description of what it is. It's just people get, when they hear that, there's like a whole culture of, oh, you know, you're just using the word quantum because you want to sound cool or something. But it is, quantum means, you know, 1. It's a unit. That's basically like has intrinsic oneness to itself, and it's conscious. So sometimes things are just good terms, and just because they were used by like woo people or Deepak Chopra or something, and I'm not ripping on him. I mean, I probably agree with him more than I agree with almost any physicist employed at a university, but I understand that if you don't see the connection to consciousness that physics has, then yeah, you're gonna think that it's just like posturing or something to use physics terms. I was told once though by a physics guy with a PhD in physics. He told me I shouldn't use the word hadron because I am, you know, I'm just like then trying to be Deepak Chopra or something like that, and people like that should not use the word hadron. So there will always be objections to using quote unquote scientific language, but you should use descriptive language. If it's accurate, it's accurate. But yeah, I mean, the fact that 19 is the interior sum of this, it contextualizes the number in a structure that shows you how it kind of relates to others. And you need models like that to understand, I think, how prime numbers relate to consciousness specifically as they grow. Like what is the difference between, I don't know, what's a big prime number? Is 71 prime number? Not even here. It's just left. All these are prime numbers. Any of these prime numbers. I have like 10,000 here. That's why it's hard for me to pick one, because I've been staring at like 10,000 of them. But what's the difference between 2 and 61 and, you know, 5,281? How does that impact consciousness? I don't know yet. You'd have to put those numbers into models that aren't just a line like this, where you're not seeing relationships. It's really spinorial relationships or self-referential relationships. You can't see that in a number line. But when I'm one of the things that I've realized when I'm working with prime numbers is I can see patterns and they're the same patterns every time, but I don't know what they mean, and they are like, I know it's going to take me years to start to unravel them. Like I made this model over a year ago, I think. There's so much here. It's related to Robert Edward Grant's work with his 31 rotational symmetry for, you know, he has this model that is, it's like, looks like a clock, but it has, instead of 24, it has 31 on it, and he can use it to basically perceive, not even calculate, but it's like, it's above calculation. It can show you what the next digit is for an irrational number, but you can, you know, just pick any number digit that it would be. So you in the string, so you could be like, I want to know the 10,000th number of pi, and obviously we know that, and you can calculate that. That's not that hard to do, but imagine it's like 10 trillion or something. This model allows you to just perceive the next digit in the string. Now it doesn't, that doesn't mean that you can get all the information, because if you want all the numbers leading up to that number, then you have to calculate it. But if you want to just perceive that one, then you can use this model, if I understand it correctly, to do that. And I see that in prime numbers as well. When you're looking at the differences between prime numbers, you get very interesting patterns that line up with physics, and that pattern you get, basically, I don't really know how to explain this, so bear with me. I'm like trying to choose the words. I know I'm struggling, but prime numbers are probably the most difficult and also just the most fascinating structures that I examine, and I only do it pretty rarely compared to other things. I constantly look at them, but I don't dive deep very often, because when I do, it's tough to stop. And at the end, you end up just decoding a pattern that you can understand a little bit, but you can't really understand it. There's clearly something amazing happening here, and I cannot tell you exactly what it is, but I can tell you that there's 31 instances where the difference between the differences of prime numbers. So if you take the differences between the prime numbers and then you take the differences between those differences, you can get this string of 2. So it goes 1, 1, 2, and then that 2, there's 31 of the differences between prime numbers, and then it goes to 8. And what's interesting about this is that when you sum that all total, it's 72, which fermions go through 720 degrees of rotation before they come back to their original state, and that's because the universe is going through that in order to perceive itself. It's doing one rotation from the inside out, basically, or one observation from the inside out, one observation from the outside in. So if a total observation is 360, 360 spinning from the inside out and 360 spinning from the inside in, from the outside in, is 720. But and you can see that in my models. So when you see 72, it's the same thing as seeing 720. Because remember, in metamathematics, there is no 0 as a placeholder. It's just there is no empty set either. So it means infinity, basically. And so it's not 720 and 72 are pretty much the same in this space. The rules change. And I don't know how we're going to standardize this, but I'm sure people have said that about other fields that they made progress in. But I see lots of patterns here that line up with my models of physics, but I cannot tell you exactly what's going on, and I don't know if I ever will be able to. You have 24 here as basically being 72 divided by 3, and there's always a triadic aspect to any kind of growth of information, because you have information that can be grown, information that has been grown, and information that you do have as the total now. That is the sum of what has been grown. So it's just inevitable. Chris Langan talks about this. He says it's all triadic. He's right, but it's also dualistic as well, and it's also singular, because people will say, well, the past and the future reflect across the present. So that's really dualistic, because the present is different from the past and the future. You can perceive the past You can remember the past, which is to perceive it. You can uh, predict the future, just by logic. If you're seeing something fall, it's probably going to keep falling. Um, that's you predicting the future, and literally you are perceiving the future. If I throw you a baseball and you catch it in your hand, it's because you perceived the future. You calculated it. And but in reality, there's only the present, which is singular. So it just depends on which perspective you want to take on it. So when people are arguing, oh, is it dualistic? Is it triadic? It just depends on how you're looking at it. But I mean, eventually you have to get to a singularity, which is always oneness and infinite growth at the same time, basically. Or endless oneness, or like infinite oneness. They're kind of different, but also very similar. Infinite would be included in endlessness, but it doesn't. Endlessness does not necessarily include infinity, I would say. But yeah, I mean, these numbers are fascinating. And when you stare at numbers as much as I do, then like you see the same ones pop up in the same relationships with other numbers, and so you see the pattern even if you don't understand what it's doing. But you need models like this that can contextualize prime numbers. It's interesting, even this verse, my cosmological verse model, was when I was building it, I was using the calculative model. It was like I could know whether or not something was going to be a prime number or not based on how based on the information relating to the structure of the model itself, if that makes any sense. It's like I knew that one more than the model in a certain spot would be prime always in certain instances. So those models can contextualize things. But here I've been taking today, just before the stream, and so I don't really know exactly what's happening here, but I just have it recorded. I was looking at the periodic table, and I noticed, obviously, like I showed you, these twin prime numbers popping up, and so I wanted to see, how many were there? What was could I see a pattern there in any way? There's definitely interesting patterns. There's always very interesting numbers. But I took them here, and it's interesting because I said that 0 represents infinity, but it's really like it represents what it looks like. It is a circle of information. And what's interesting is that if you look at like this, okay, this 1302 is these two summed, and like, this 1260 is these two summed, and this 1218 is these two summed. Basically, what's happening in this is that you have always a triadic pattern. The two blues are they're twin prime numbers. The gold one in the center is the number between the two. If you sum the twin prime, not twin primes, they're the preceding prime that was part of a twin prime, and then the succeeding prime that is part of a twin prime together, and you have this. If you put, and I know this is going to sound like super obvious and just like almost not, I don't know, I guess like not profound, but that's what happens when you say something that's like really, really true. But if what's happening here is that with the numbers that I ended up bringing over to look at for a specific reason, basically I was looking at trying to find if there looked like there was an endpoint where it started repeating again in a way, but it's tough because numbers are going through an information spiral objectively. This is something that you can see when you do any kind of like sequences in Excel, like Fibonacci sequence over here, or the Lucas numbers, or this one that I've come up with that's just like a order sequence. Basically, it's like ordering information. I don't fully understand it yet, but I can tell based on the numbers that it's kind of what it's doing, and that it's a very important sequence, and it's spinning. I don't know if you can see that as I move this, but it's spinning as I move it. It looks like a spiral. And you wouldn't know that if you just looked at this number and you're like, oh, what's the relationship between those two, other than just the fact that obviously there's a calculation happening here to give you a ratio. But if you back up and you look as the information grows, it's literally a double helix of a number blockchain. It just abstractly. And this is true of the Fibonacci sequence too. It's a little harder to see because it's not surrounded by zeros, but you can see it here in the corner. It's the same exact structure. It doesn't matter which sequence it is. The numbers will change in the sequence, but the pattern looks to be about the same always. That looks to be basically exactly this too. And they're totally different sequences. So, I say on here a lot, but there is only one pattern. And you can see that in the numbers. So when we think about what we call mathematics today, and that is generally accepted as, the most objective field there is, it's not thought of in its practical application in pretty much anything almost as the same way that the Fibonacci sequence is. Like, in a way, the Fibonacci sequence is more fundamental than just 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6, just a logarithmic, adding 1 to the previous number line, basically. That's not as objective as the Fibonacci sequence. But it's almost impossible to think about that until you contextualize it into reality, as there is when information is being generated, information is being generated. It's not just this. The way that we think about math is so subjective, and we think it's so objective, but truly objective, or aka meta mathematics, as Stephen Wolfram calls it, it follows the pattern of the growth of life and matter and consciousness and the universe much more closely than it follows just a logarithmic adding 1 to the previous number, sequence. That sequence comes from the Fibonacci sequence. So the Fibonacci sequence and just adding 1 to the previous as well, both of these are self-referential to some degree, but they're like, you need both those simultaneous strings of numbers to generate reality. It's not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the way that we think about math. But it's hard to even explain that especially if you can't show somebody even just this, where there very obviously, hopefully it's coming through clear on YouTube, if I just move this, you don't have to look at the numbers, what the numbers are in the sequence. You just kind of look past them, and you can see it's forming a spiral. I'm moving it so that it's easier to see. You can't see it. If I just sat there like this, you would never notice. But if I move it, that's when you can see it. It's because it's a blockchain. Which is a double helix, just like your DNA. It's a spinning information growing bundle. It's fascinating. But that happens with prime numbers as well, and I think that primes have something to do with, at some point in a spin sequence of the growth of information, you come back around to yourself, and at that point, you are everything that has led up to that point, and also you have come back around yourself, and it's like a dog chasing its own tail. It finally caught it, and you're now able to see yourself, and basically that leads to like a prime number where it's divisible by 1 and itself, and that's it. And it's very weird, but if you don't link this concept, not just link it to consciousness, but know that consciousness is the substrate that this pattern is not even manifesting on. It is, that pattern is consciousness. You can't link it to consciousness. It is consciousness. If you don't accept that idea, then you're not going to be able to ever do anything with these structures. It's like bump periodicity and things like that, and the Calabi-Yau manifold, and like all these other really abstract, seemingly abstract mathematical structures that, you know, mathematicians know are beautiful and seem to be objective, but they don't know what they actually describe, and you end up just saying things like there's 11 dimensions, and that's just nonsense. I mean, I know why they come up with that number, but they haven't been able to apply a lot of that stuff because they're looking in the wrong places for the patterns. But I mean, if you come up with an kind of a more objective structure in mathematics, like bond periodicity, it will correspond to the growth of information in reality, and you will be able to point to the material structure and say that is bond periodicity, if it's real. If you can't ever point to something and be like, that is a Calabi-Yau manifold, that is bond periodicity, then whatever it is that you're looking for is probably incorrect. Everything that exists. There isn't math that isn't linked to consciousness and matter, which are two sides of one coin. Matter is what matters to consciousness. So it's mind and matter are just two sides of one coin. But you need to contextualize these things in order to like start building. We have not done that with prime numbers, as so far as I know. I don't hear anybody talking about prime numbers in consciousness. I hope somebody is, but I don't hear about it. Like, I can tell what's happening with this sequence because basically the ratio that's being generated is it's increasingly moving towards 1/3. And that is making perfect sense because my model of the universe basically shows that it appears to me to be inevitable that God put 1/3 of his energy towards creation or the universe, or the multiverse chain, whatever you want to call it, within himself. 1/3 of his energy went to that, and basically he's got 2/3 left for himself. It's mathematically inevitable, and this is basically what this is showing. So I can see kind of like things that are happening in these sequences of numbers, but I can't tell you exactly what's happening. It's obviously a self-referential information chain, and it's basically this is creation. This is literally creation. You start with 1, then 2, then 1 sums to 4, then you get from there 0.4 repeating infinitely. So you've basically crossed inside you've taken what's outside, you've now gone inside, which is past the decimal, and then it's starting to just spin up. And it just spins and spins and spins and spins and spins. And it's basically 1/3 of God's energy just creating information, which is the universe. And you can see that in the ratio that's being created even. It's fascinating. It's just like the when you look at the ratio, the golden ratio in the Fibonacci sequence, that ratio is objectively the growth of information, because for one, it's always referencing the previous. So with Fibonacci sequence, you know, it's just the previous two added together. And if 8 is all of the information from, you know, prior to that, essentially it represents that in a way, then 13 comes in and incorporates that information and then structures it and then builds on it. And that's what's happening with the Fibonacci sequence. And you can see this geometrically when you look at things like here. If you're looking at the number 108. So it's just a fascinating number. Oh, look, he did hyperfactorial of 3 since it is the form. Yeah, they did do it. That's cool. I've never seen anybody else put the 1 there. The 1 to the power of 1. That's good. I missed it. I've been referencing this a couple times over the last hour, and I did miss that part of it. But basically, if you look at the golden ratio right here, it shows visually how this information is growing. A plus B is to A as A is to B. So basically, it's just this is this A, and this total structure is the same exact shape as A and B. And that is, it's just an infinitely repeating pattern, if that helps kind of visualize it a bit. It is a fascinating and beautiful thing. People talk about it a lot, but there's a reason that people talk about it a lot. But yeah, I mean, it's a self-referential information chain. And you'll always see this ratio that will come out of it, like the golden ratio comes out of the Fibonacci sequence or the Lucas number sequence, with this information growth sequence that I have kind of just created. It's producing a ratio that is ever increasingly moving towards 1/3. And that's exactly what you would expect to see from a information growth sequence that is meant to at least model in some way creation. It's like outside, or I guess you could say it's oneness, inside and separateness, or outside and separateness, and then inside, the 4 primary perspectives, and then that's that, and then it kicks off, and then you can just like grow information within yourself, because anything to the right of the decimal is inside of a whole number. So that's what it's basically. It's self-reflecting infinitely. If God has 4 primary perspectives that he perceives from, and then he creates sentient beings within himself that also have 4 primary perspectives, and he creates an infinite number of them, What you're going to see is you're going to see 0.4 repeating infinitely. And then there's a bunch of other relationships of information that emerge from there, and it gets very difficult to understand if it's even possible. But it's very obvious and possible up here, as it's still simple, where it's 074 074 074 185 185, before it just breaks into what appears to be chaos. But when you back up and you realize that it's this like braided rope, like that book Golder et Trebach, The Eternal Golden Braid, like that, this is that. It's just an eternal golden braid. Gold just means eternal, so it's like just an infinite braid. If you ever told me when I was like 5 years ago, or maybe 6 years ago, that I would just, out of my own interest, just stare at numbers like this for hours on end, I would have laughed at you. I failed algebra, I think twice. But this is the golden ratio from the Fibonacci sequence. I think this is the Lucas sequence, but it's the same exact ratio. The only difference is that the Fibonacci sequence goes 1, 1, 2, 3, which is, my model does that as well. But instead of that, the Lucas sequence goes 1, I think it's actually 1, 3, 4, 7. It might be 1, 2, 3. I forgot. I think it's 1, 3. I don't look at the Lucas number sequence that much because it's literally the exact same ratio as the Fibonacci sequence. It's the same thing. It's just a different it's like a slightly different perspective on the same exact structure. It's kind of like a rope. When you look at a rope, there's actually multiple strands in the rope. So if you're like rope or braid, basically, you can see that there's multiple strings here that are more entangled with each other, and you can get closer and closer and closer and just get, to a singular strand. But then there's also, these strands are more entangled with the ones that doesn't want to zoom in, but all the strands in this group are more entangled with each other than they are with this group. But there's relationships between those groups as well that form symmetries, and then they also form to a cohesive whole. And it's basically the same pattern that is in a strand here is then in a strand here, and then is also in the rope itself, like a Mandelbrot set, basically, or like it's a fractal. And that is exactly what's happening in these numbers. If you're going to tie information together, you're going to build a rope like that. It's just inevitable. But it's like a rope that you can only see in Excel. Because you're in the rope. But we do need a new like I said, guys, this is just a working session on what I'm working on. Tomorrow we do have our call at 7 p.m. Pacific time in the Discord. Message me privately on Instagram if you want to join our call. It's open call. It goes on for hours, and we talk about anything you want to talk about. It's a great conversation. But going to Robert Edward Grant. Robert Edward Grant does amazing work. I mean, I don't know how he does as much as he does. Sometimes I back up and I look at how much work I've done and I'm amazed, but then I look at how much work he gets done and I don't understand how he does it. It's like a machine. Robert Edward Grant periodic table. His is much better. I'm not saying there isn't, it's not, can't be improved, but I don't know how exactly you would do it, but look at this. I'm sure there's a way, but it's very good. It's leaps and bounds above what we currently have. Linking it to music. And geometry. Fascinating. Sabine Hassenfelder is wrong when she says beauty is not a guide for physics. Maybe not if you're like an experimentalist. If you're maybe if you're an experimentalist, I guess more so. But there's only one pattern, and it's the most beautiful pattern in the world. And if you don't see it, then you don't see it. But it absolutely is. Beauty is the guide for physics. The problem comes from when people think that they are seeing something that they're calling it beautiful for the sake of wanting to pursue it, and it's kind of like tricking your mind. But I mean, I didn't try and make something beautiful when I made this. Still the most beautiful model of the universe I've ever seen, but I didn't try and make it beautiful. I just tried to model reality, and it just happens to be beautiful. It looks like a piece of art, but I'm not good enough at art to make that. It's like me and fight. I talked about this on my stream yesterday. I have great rhythm when I'm doing martial arts, and it looks good, even though I'm not trying to look good. I'm just trying to fight. But if I try and dance and I try and look good, I look terrible. If I tried to make an art piece that looked beautiful, it would look terrible. I'm not good at that kind of thing. I can do photography and that's it. But if this was like a fight for me. I was fighting to figure out the truth, and it ended up being beautiful. If I tried to paint a beautiful picture of the universe, it would look terrible. It's very weird. Like this too. This is beautiful. This is the same exact structure. It's just structured. It's just the universe still, but it's just different in what you're paying attention to and how you're looking at the information. But I mean, there's 720 bits of information here, and there also is in the model that I just showed you. It's basically just going through various perspectives on a bit of information. So basically what happens is that you have to start with one bit of information, and then you just examine that bit of information from a bunch of different perspectives, which is 4 to start, and then it adds to the 1 basically, because now you've seen that 1 from different perspectives, and it literally builds information, and it just continues going through this process of just building information from the information that you have, and it always starts with 1. So that's basically what's happening. It's like if you placed something in the middle of a room and you were photographing it, and you had to photograph every side of it, you would photograph 4 sides of it. You would take, one picture from one angle, one from another, one from another, and one from another, and it would be 4. But then if you wanted to see beyond that, which is, it's a little bit different in 3D space, but it still should make some sense, is that you would want to photograph it from the above and also from below. But imagine, like, you have to go out of your way and somehow game your way into taking a photo of this thing from the top, because imagine it's on your plane, so you can't actually just see it from above. Imagine it's like 7 feet tall. You can only see the sides, and it's sitting on the floor, so you can't see what's below it. So this is what's happening with our reality all the time too. So we can see things on our plane from 4 different perspectives. That's why we have 4 fundamental forces. Space-time is 4-dimensional, but there's also what is beyond it, or what was preceding it, and then what is succeeding it, which is what is below it and what is above it. And you can, when you contextualize it like that, you can actually still generate the information, even if you aren't in, like, experiencing it. It's like you can predict what's coming next, that you can predict that the universe is going to make another universe without watching it do it, because you can look at it being modeled with us. You, as a sentient being that reproduces, make copies of yourself, and that's how you grow information. The universe does that as well. It was interesting, though, when I was researching the elements, I had basically come up with this this model. I've showed it before, where it is the stages of sentience, I call it, which is basically a reduced version of the periodicity of, like, life or consciousness or sentience. But the periodicity is 8, and the stages are them reduced to 4. So basically you have a hadron is an assembly of quarks, an atom is an assembly of hadrons, a molecule is an assembly of atoms, a cell is an assembly of molecules, an organism is an assembly of cells, a family is an assembly of organisms, a caste is an assembly of families, and a technological singularity, which is an aeon, is an assembly of castes. And then that's 8. And you have the singularity aspect of that and the multiplicity aspect of that. And then it just restarts again and again. You can reduce this to 4, and they are, let's see where, here. They are an atom of hadrons, a cell of molecules, a family of organisms, and technology of castes. You still have every bit of information in this model that you have in the previous one, but you've reduced it to 4 levels that instead of 8. And in the previous one, it's breaking it and showing it to you as, this is the singularity perspective, this is the multiplicity perspective. This one, it's showing you how information is changed, and you have replicative structures over here that maneuver in time via lineage. Via changes in lineages, in their lineage. And then you have interactive structures over here which maneuver in space via individuals and individual interactions. So organisms, molecules, hadrons, castes. But over here you have structures that change via lineage, via basically replication and alteration, and you could call it adaptation. And if you think about an atom, it starts as hydrogen and then it goes to helium, and then it goes, you go through all of the different elements that are made within stars, and all the other aspects of various ways in which elements are made. Some of them are made in different types of stars, some of them are made in collisions, and there's a few at least. I don't know them all, but that is because they're literally like adapting to their environment, essentially. And they're growing information by making multiple different kinds of elements. It's a lineage structure because helium comes from hydrogen, and you keep going, you'll get carbon, you'll get gold, you'll get uranium, and then I think that's it in the last one, that is the of the naturally occurring elements, at least. But that is a lineage structure because you're changing and growing via building on the previous generation. So helium is built on hydrogen, and gold is built on platinum. But if you look at molecules, chemical molecules, like it and compounds, this is about joining, this element and this element. Or if you look at organisms, you have to go interact with and go to the coffee shop or get married to, or fight some other person, and or even how you interact with, I don't know, flies, whatever, it doesn't matter, plants. Like, you interact with other organisms in an interactive way that's not causing lineages directly. Basically, it's different. You're not a lineage. You're like a snapshot, but not the lineage itself. Lineages they don't maneuver in space because they are space, really, because space is itself a lineage of universes. And so lineages do not maneuver in space. They change themselves. And if you're the universe and you're changing yourself, it will change our space. But and if you change yourself as an organism, it would change the space that your cells exist in, but and are experiencing. But like, literally, I mean, if you lost a limb or something like that, like, your cells are going to have a change to their space-time environment. Like, there's just a big part of it is going to disappear if you lose an arm or something like that. And but then there's this lineage structure too that is changing itself over time, which time is actually just lineages, because that is as objective as it gets. It's just from this sentient being to the next sentient being. So basically, one of the things that I've been debating on whether or not hadrons are conscious beings, sentient beings, or whether or not they just model them. I still haven't really decided, but there was two possibilities that I was every now and then reconsidering, and that was stars and then hadrons. I'm still think about hadrons. I don't know if it's possible for us to know whether or not they're sentient or not. I think they are, but I don't. They're also like the hands of the universe. So does the universe have sentient hands? Probably. But I mean, it might be way simpler than I'm making it, because your hand is sentient because it's attached to you. It's not that it is intrinsically itself sentient, separate from you, but because it's linked to you, it's still sentient. So it might, I don't know if trying to draw a line at that level is actually productive or not, and that might be why it's kind of a question that seems unanswerable. But the other structure that I was considering was stars, because stars have this life process that they go through, it seems, and they grow and then they die, and there's a lot of processes that they go through that is similar to what we would understand as life processes. And what I think it is basically they are not sentient singularity. This I put this together in the last couple days, and I always leaned that they weren't, but I couldn't really explain why. It's that they're basically like a beehive, and the bees of a star are the atoms of the various elements that are within the star. And it has this hive mind type of mentality, but the hive itself is not a singular organism, even though it's very close. It's not like you and your cells. A beehive is not like, you're not a beehive. You are a step above and totally entangled to where you're self-aware. The beehive is not self-aware. The other workers are aware of the queen, and the queen is aware of the workers and things like that, but it's not that those bees are not within the queen like your cells are within you, and the colony itself as a singular structure is not aware of itself. I think that this is exactly what stars are. Is basically they are literally like beehives for atoms of elements. I don't know how crazy that sounds. It doesn't actually sound crazy to me at all, but it might sound crazy to you. It sounds like it makes perfect sense to me, but I have been thinking about it for probably 2 years. So, but it answered the question like beautifully, because I've been discussing beehives a lot and eusocial organism structures like ant colonies and beehives and naked mole rats and things like that, and how we're moving towards that. But I think that we will also transcend that stage of being a beehive. Richard Dolan says this all the time, the ufologist who was on Kurt Jaimungal's channel. I listen to Richard Dolan a lot. I really like his content. He definitely, a lot of his takes on history as well are just interesting. But I recommend his channel for sure. But he basically said we're going to become like an anthill, and he's not happy about it. am not happy about that idea. I do think we will basically become that, but I don't think we will stop there. We'll basically become a singular organism. We'll be cells in an organism instead of just worker bees. But before you can be cells in an organism, you will be worker bees for the hive. And that little period of change is between being, I guess, not totally eusocial, and then also beyond being eusocial, being a singular mind in and of itself. You're going to experience tyranny, and that is definitely coming. A beehive is absolute tyranny, and so is an ant colony, and they don't care about themselves as individuals. That we will go through that, and it will suck. But then after that, it will be great because, you're much. If a bee for a beehive dies, it doesn't matter the same way as like your cells are part of you, and you have to when a bee is starving, the queen doesn't have to be starving. If your cells are starving, you are starving. You are much more one. And but to get to that point, you got to be a beehive first, I think. So I agree with Richard Dolan, but so did Nikola Tesla said this as well. He said the future of humanity is like that of the bee or something. And he's right, but it's not the end of the story. What's up, Torin? This is basically the outline of my addition to evolutionary theory, basically. And it's that right now what we call evolutionary theory is really should just be called adaptation theory. And then but adaptation theory is one side of evolutionary theory, and of my proposal for a much more explanatory evolutionary theory that explains everything from, how do you get from a quark to, how do you even get a quark? Not even how do you go from a quark. How do you get a quark and then go to a human being, and then where's the human being going, and then what is the universe? If it's all a single lineage structure, which is following this pattern, then that you need a theory that obviously is about more than just adaptation, because this is the adaptation space right here on the cosmological level. This is not. This is the ascension space over here. Adaptation, ascension. But within this relativity, this looks like adaptation, and this looks like not ascension, just kind of like moving around. But in order to get from being an how do you get an organism? How do you become cells of an organism after being a beehive? And how do you get to be a beehive from being hunter-gatherer, little tribal family unit type of sentient beings like apes? And then how do you get to be a sexual organism that's sexually reproductive from an organism that is reproduces asexually, like cells or something like that? These are questions that are not really answered by just Darwinian evolution. Which Darwinian evolution, I mean, adaptation is real, that's a fact, but it doesn't. It supports God, the idea of God. It doesn't discount it, but it's not the whole story either. There's more to this as well. There's a behind the scenes aspect to it that is ascension. And I don't know how long it's going to take for the Richard Dawkins of the world, or if they even will, and not just him, but people who are who just more aligned with that ideology, like to accept the idea that, okay, yeah, we have adaptation and that is a real thing, but ascension appears to also be a real thing, and therefore you're not wrong, but neither is religion necessarily, and or the woo people, which I say that not to be critical of the quote unquote woo people. I agree with them. I'm saying what they're called, but woo, as I say on here a lot, woo is true. Like, it is. A lot of it is, at least. It's not I don't like the term, but I mean, maybe just embrace it. It's kind of, it makes sense. It's just you're trying to understand the things that aren't right in front of your face, but are also the structures that you are within but can't see, because it's like, has a fish ever seen water? How often do we see air? It's like that kind of thing. It's like you just don't, because you don't know what it's like to not have it there. But you can see there's this like alternation happening. But this is about periodicity in material reality. And materialism is real, but it is information being processed by a mind. So it's not I don't agree with the debate of like materialism versus idealism versus panpsychism. They're all true, every single one of them. It's just like which one. Ultimately, you have to arrive at one single label that will describe reality, and that's a sentient singularity. But a sentient singularity implies a being that is aware and therefore is perceiving information, which we call matter, and also, um, has feelings, which means like it is thinking about itself in a way that isn't just perceived in what we would call material reality. And that is idealism. So it's idealism and materialism both at simultaneously being perceived and processed by a conscious sentient being, which means and that's all there really is. So panpsychism is real. It just needs to be contextualized into this periodicity. Because if you don't contextualize it like this, I understand why people think it's nonsense. Because if you try and convince somebody that I don't know, a bar stool is nonsense, is sentient, like, I mean, maybe they'll believe you, but they shouldn't, because it's not. A car is not a sentient being. A phone is not a sentient being, but molecules are, and atoms are, and you are. So that's been the problem with panpsychism. It's not whether or not it's true. It's just like, what is the correct context of how to perceive it. And that's true also of idealism and materialism. They're both true. Materialism is literally you processing information that you are perceiving and interpreting as being separate from you. And idealism is you processing information that you are perceiving as being intrinsically, part of you. That's it. But your ideas are just as real as material reality to at least a certain level of sentience, because our material reality is literally due to us existing inside of mind that is, the universe's mind, and that mind's thoughts are our material reality. So, and that means, by the way, that our thoughts are probably pretty linked to our cells' material reality, like how they perceive things. The information that you process in your mind will change what your cells perceive. And by the way, everybody who's ever, like, everybody has given this thought, even if they don't know it. Like, I used to think myself into being sick for school when I was like a little kid, and then I would actually get sick. And I've thought, if you ever have like a health scare or something like that, you can literally manifest symptoms, and a lot of doctors know this and will admit it. And I've done it to myself. So like and then, and even if it's not there, I mean, you can literally like manifest physically observable reality. I'm gonna tell more stories about it at some point, because I have some hilarious ones, and I will tell them, but I'm gonna save it for when I have the cameras set up, because it'll be way funnier. I have a very funny story about it. But I mean, people do this with back pain all the time. It's like you focus on your back pain, and you will literally get it to be worse. And I think I heard Jordan Peterson talk about it once, I think, or um, might have been somebody else, but it might have been him too, where basically anybody that has like a back injury where that gives them chronic pain, a lot of times their focus on it really makes it worse over time, and they actually do make themselves less mobile because of it. Your cells are reacting to your thoughts, and your thoughts are not just in your brain, like they are everywhere that is information processing inside of you. But I was looking at this too, and I want to talk about this. I don't know if, who's going to watch this stream, but there's people who are very good at music in our Discord community, and I want to discuss this music tomorrow in our Discord call. But where is it? Ukulele. Gosh, I have way too many tabs. So I was looking at music today, and so the ukulele has 4 tuner notes. It's G, C, A, E. I was trying to come up with a little saying to help me remember, and I came up with this for now. I'm sure I could come up with something better, probably, but God constitutes all, everyone. It works for now. It's not great, but I needed something to help me remember it, and it did work. But there's apparently 12 notes in music. I'm not a music expert at all, but I can see the pattern, and I looked it up. That's why I got the ukulele, so I can experience the pattern, not just memorize it. But one of the things that I was looking at is there's these 12 notes, and I wanted to see, do they line up with I think it was like 2 weeks ago we made this on a call. We were talking about blocks of information growth, and we were doing the standard model over here, and we were doing human relationships here. So parent, child, sibling, spouse. These are the 4 primary relationships of humans. And then you have secondary relationships with his grandchild and grandparent. Then you have tertiary, which is cousin, niece / nephew, aunt / uncle. And then you have quaternary relationships, which is friend, acquaintance, and enemy. And this is a total of 12. And there's 12 music notes. So I was like, okay, obviously this is going to align. And I'm trying to figure out where the music notes go. And I'm going to probably save it for tomorrow during our call to talk about, but I can kind of work it out, or basically at least start to, because there's 2 here, 2 here. This is going to be a group of 3. This is going to be a group of 3. And you can look at the standard model and be like, okay, you could do the last 3 are all neutrinos. And then you have charm and strange. And then you have like tau, down and up, and beauty, truth, muon, electron. I'm like, some of these are a little bit complicated, but some of them are very obvious. These are all neutral, but the last ones are going to be neutral. The quaternary relationships, because probably because they're not influencing your lineage structure at all. So either they are the neutral ones, or it's these tertiary ones. But it doesn't matter, right, that much. This is one group, this is the other group. It's just, should these be where these are and these be where these are? I don't know yet. But other than that, it's very easy to see, especially with the human relationships. Oh man. Oh, Ethan, cool. Hopefully we're back still. I know we just kind of had a hiccup, but same with tinnitus. Sharps and flats are essentially the 2 names for the same note. A sharp is equal to a B flat. An A sharp is a B flat? So when listing them, you'd want to pick one or the other, either using all flats or all sharps. Okay. So you have sharp, sharp, and sharp, and then flat. But where's the other flat? That's the thing. There's only two flats. Hopefully this is still streaming. Please comment in the chat if you are still able to see this. I know that I accidentally hit back on the browser on my. I did it on my mouse or my trackpad. If you swipe to the side and I want to swipe here, but my mouse is over uh, on YouTube's like window, it takes me out of the streaming. It's very annoying. Yes, and C sharp is the same as D flat. Okay. C sharp is D flat. Okay, so D flat. Okay, I see, I see, I see, I see. Is D flat. And then you're saying that A sharp is the same as B flat. So B flat is the same as A sharp. Do you know what this is doing? This is spinning, which obviously that makes sense. It's just because it's basically just linking the previous. It's like this one is linked here, and then this one is linked to this one, and then this one is linked to this one. I'm not saying it's exactly like that, but all information follows this pattern, but I never really saw it in music because I didn't know that B flat was A sharp. Okay, so then, so C flat, then I'm saying you would only use sharps or flats. You wouldn't list some of as sharps or some as flats. Okay, see what you're saying. So then what is? So then you would have A and so then why isn't this C flat and this C flat? I copied this from, Wikipedia, so I don't, I'm not claiming that this is correct. This would be D flat, and then this would be no. I'm confused. I'm gonna get rid of these colors because they're distracting me. So you would do, okay, there you go. A, what is the hashtag? Does that mean flat or does that mean sharp or does it mean both? That's all 12 tones in the Western tuning system written using sharps. Okay, so I'm guessing that's means sharp. Okay, so you have A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D. I'm guessing the hashtags are sharps. E, F, F, and then G, and then G. Okay. Um, I'm still looking for like. Actually, I think that this is helping. This might help me understand it, unless I'm just totally screwing this up. But this, I'm looking for the symmetry of them, because if you look at it, it's hard to see, because your mind, or at least my mind, wants this to basically just be like every two or every other one is going to be a sharp, but that's not the way that it is. It's, not a sharp, then a sharp, then not, then a sharp, then not, then a sharp, then not, then a sharp. It almost appears random, but it's not if you break it like this. So I don't know if this makes any kind of sense to how music is done, but it definitely is. This, it would imply that these two are similar, and I don't know if that's true. A and G sharp. It's definitely going to be something we're going to talk about tomorrow. But I did get my ukulele all tuned up. Wait. I haven't really figured out how to pluck the strings very well yet, but I am working on it. I'm very excited, actually. This is like the first time I've ever been excited to learn an instrument. That sounds better. I was watching some tutorials today on starting to learn. But for some reason, if it seemed like because I tuned it yesterday, and then when I tried to play it today, I had to retune it, even though nothing had happened to it. It was like sitting in its case. So I know that eventually they would get looser, but I don't know if that's a normal thing where you just need to tune a guitar when you pick it up, basically, to play, usually anyways, or at least you should. Or if it's because it's new and there's like grease on the knobs that is making it looser or easier to move. I don't know. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Yep. No, I mean, you helped already, like a little bit. This is like, it just got me to see a symmetry in it. I did need to see that, because there's just no way I could remember uh, which one was going to be flat and sharp, because I don't see a pattern if you're just looking at it straight down. But even if this just helps me remember which one's going to be sharps and which one's not, uh, even though I can just remember that, it's that. But in my head, I can remember it by thinking about it like that, because these are now aligned. Fascinating. There's like 4, 2. Music is amazing. I just have never had like the ability to get into it uh firsthand. But it is obvious that these notes somehow will align with the standard model, um, and the, you know, organism relationships that I have here, and the perspectives and the colors that we talked about on on a stream. I mean, I don't know if these are perfectly accurate to the pattern, but it's close for sure. It's very easy to, it's much easier to see how things interact when you're looking at standard model um, and especially family relationships. That's the easiest one because we have the most firsthand experience with it. That's why when you're looking at, you know, grandchild, grandparent, cousin, niece, nephew, aunt, uncle, like it's very obvious that these three are similar and that these three are similar: friend, acquaintance, and enemy. They're not your family. Um, but then you have your nuclear family as your four primary relationships, which is your children, your parents, your siblings, and your spouse. And then after that, you have your more extended family, but still within the lineage. Then you have your extended family beyond your direct lineage into basically a new branch. And then you have, this is an entirely different branch that doesn't even come from your tree, from your branch. It's just a branch that happens to be next to your branch. Whereas this branch, at some point, you had the same branch, which is right here, and then it splits between this branch and this branch. And then there's spouse is fascinating relationship because it's a merger. So in Stephen Wolfram's work, he talks about branchial space and like rulio space, and he's talking about how you need, there's a side of this that is rules, and there's a side of this that is basically entanglement relationships, but he calls it, you know, branchial space, and basically branching. And he talks about how there's branching and merging. He has a theory of how I think bosons are merge points and fermions are branch points. I think that that's a good idea to pursue. I haven't thought about it enough to like have an opinion on it, but it sounds interesting. It's not how I think about things, but he could be right. It's possible. It doesn't sound too obvious to me because I'm looking at, I don't look at a photon and think that it's a sentient being. It's not. So I'm focused on sentient beings, but we'll see. But he's right. There's this branchial space essentially, and there's branchings happening, and then there's mergings happening. And if you want to understand that on our level, marriage is the merger between two branches. And obviously, it's very easy to understand what branching is. You know, your grandparents are this thicker branch, and then it branches into two skinnier branches, which is one of them is your nuclear family, the other one is your aunt and cousins and you know, nieces and nephews. Like that's another branch that comes from your grandparents. But then you merge with another branch every time that you have a marriage, essentially. So, and then these are just a totally different branch. Your friends and acquaintances and enemies. This is why I needed to get a ukulele though, is it's like it's very easy to understand branching and merging when you're thinking about it from a human perspective, because you know what it, on a first-hand basis, exactly what it's like to be a parent and a child. Maybe not a parent yet, but you know what it's like, what parents are like. You had parents. You were a child. Even if you don't have children, you were a child. Even if you weren't a parent, you had parents. Maybe you had a sibling. I don't know, but you understand what a sibling is, even if you don't. And same thing with spouse. Same thing with grandparents and cousins and stuff. It's not the same as like trying to figure out what is a photon versus a gluon versus, you know, quarks and neutrinos. It's like much. There's, you have to learn. It's like, that's like learning music, but it's even probably harder. because even though it's the exact same pattern, music, at least you can listen to it. You can't really listen to a gluon. But I mean, for me, actually, music is way harder. But for most people, I think music would probably be easier. It's still the same pattern. It's just how's your mind wired as far as like what it tends to pay attention to. It's interesting, though, is that there's 4 primary relationships and perspectives, and then even when you break it out, there's primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary. I can never say that word, but that is still following the same pattern that is within it and that started it. So there's only one pattern. It's the theory of everything has to also be like this. It has to follow the pattern that the theory itself describes. So it's like your pitch has to align with the pattern that it is describing as the pattern of reality, because your model or your theory is supposed to be a representative of, a model of reality. That means it has to follow the pattern of reality. It can't just describe it. It has to describe it and describe it in a structure that also follows it. And you don't even have to do that consciously. I just noticed that I started doing it inevitably, and so now I know that you have to go that direction, whether you do it consciously or not. I don't know how, what's best. Probably depends on who you are, but it will, if you're right, it will line up with the pattern that it describes within it. The thing about the way you are approaching it is that their 12-tone equal temperament tuning system is ultimately sort of an arbitrary way to divide up the frequency spectrum. It's the tuning system we use in the West, but there are other tuning systems that have different numbers of notes. Yeah, I know. I was learning about it today, and I was like, the thing is, though, is what it is that it's like, from one perspective, you can work with 9, and from another perspective, you can work with 6, and from another perspective, you can work with 12, and from an ultimate perspective, you work with 1, but above that, you work with 4. So it's like you can do that with any of these things as well. So there are constraints and freedoms to these various perspectives, which would be these tuning systems. 12 is a number that is used a lot because it has a lot of divisors. It's very divisible and like breakable into a bunch of different little units that are symmetrical, more so than like even 9 or 10 or something like that, 8. It's like 60 is the most it's like the most it has the most divisors, I think, of any 2-digit number. 12 has a lot too, though. It's just very divisible. That's why people do it. So, but it's not necessary completely, because here I can explain it like this. So you don't need grandparent and grandchild, because every grandchild is also a child, and every grandparent is also a parent. So you can describe them as just parents and children, ultimately. You don't have to describe them as grandparent or grandchild, but you're adding a perspective in of them that explains it. You're just adding information by looking at them from a different viewpoint. So if you are your parents and you're looking at they're looking at your grandparents, they're looking at them and they're like, that's my parent and I'm their child. And you can look and say, yeah, my parent is their child and they are my parent's child. So now you have the same amount of information they do, but then you can add to it and say, but therefore then also they are my grandparent and I am their grandchild. And now you've added information, even though you're still working off the 4 fundamental perspectives, which I don't think that you can actually go below that. other than, that is like separate oneness essentially. Um, and that's basically it. So, but you can't really do that because everything is intrinsically one. So it seems like you can do that in our subjective reality, but ultimately in the realm of consciousness and the cosmos, you can't go below 4. 4 is primary, but in relativity, you can go to 2, but you can't do that actually in objectivity, I guess. It forces you to have 4. But um the, so I mean your cousin is a sibling of your parent, and you don't need to say cousin. It's built on these. And this is probably what's happening with these tuning systems too. So you can probably do 4, just like you can have 4 strings on a ukulele, and versus 6 when you add in the next 2 perspectives, versus, then it goes to 9. And this all lines up with the quantum of consciousness model. 4 primary perspectives, then you break up, oneness into singularity, in oneness within and oneness without. Then it breaks it to 6, and then it's within a 3x3 grid structure, which is an interaction space, which brings you to 9, and then you can add in more as well, and you get these, 3 more, and you get to 12. And you could probably take it to 14, to be honest. I don't know what you would you take it to above 14 though. Like, I can totally see how you could take it to 14, but I can't see how you would take it above 14. You might be able to, but I just don't know how you would do it. It would be very easy to take it to 14 though. You're like, just add 2 to this, and literally like this. And then just go. I already thought of probably them. I think that this would be them. Basically, this is like the organism relationship. Basically, it's not just humans. I mean, geckos and plants, and if especially if they're like plants that reproduce with sexual reproduction, they're going to have these exact same relationships. Even plants. So it's not just humans, but we just have human labels for them. But my geckos have parents and grandparents and children and spouses and cousins. But that's why Robert Grant's tuning system is really interesting. Medieval Arabic music used a 17-note tuning system. Wow. That's where I'm lost. I'd have to think more about that. But that's very cool. I mean, it's another prime, which is interesting. It's like the first prime in this. 4 is not prime, 6 is not prime, 9 is not prime, 12 is not prime, 14 is not prime. But if you get to 17, you just hit a prime. So that is interesting. I would love to look into that more tomorrow. You're gonna see there. I predict there's gonna be some kind of change and shift there, because you've hit a prime. I mean, how many keys are on a piano? Piano keys number. I think it's 81, something like that. It's 88. Okay. Some electric keyboards have 64 or 44. I mean, these numbers make a lot of sense. all these numbers popped into what I was looking at today with prime numbers and things like that. I know none of those are primes, but all those numbers popped up. But even when you look at these, I was looking at the frequencies of the notes, and where is it? Right here. Frequency. This, I must have deleted something at some point. But here's the frequencies, and then I read that basically like the next, it was like G sharp, I think, was 88. It was 880, which is basically, it was just double 440, which is basically, that's 44 and 88, which is interesting because they use those numbers for keyboards and things like that. Because you need it. That makes perfect sense, though. You need like a system that allows you to access the various perspectives. Every string on a guitar is a perspective. Every string on a ukulele is a perspective as well. Then you can get, I don't know, to a harp. I don't know how many strings are on a harp. But it would mirror some type of objective structure. 47. Interesting. I can't tell you what that means, but I guarantee you there's a reason why it has 47. 44 to 47 strings. Interesting. But I'm not surprised that like 5 string guitars are not common. It's like a bass has 4 strings, a ukulele has 4 strings, neither one has 5 strings or 3 strings or 2 strings even. And that's because 4 is where you actually can like maneuver. It's not just differentiation. If it's 2, it's just differentiation. If it's 3, you're just repeating. And then if it's 4, you can actually really, you can orient and go different directions. It's like there's north, south, east, and west for the same exact reason. It's not just north and south, but it's not even just north, south, east, and west. We have north, south, east, west, and then you add 2 more, and it's right and left. And then you add 2 more, and it's up and down. And like these are just ways of orienting. I'm sure that all that stuff aligns with instruments and things like that, and music notes. Piano key frequencies. Key number 108. Different music tuning systems. I was looking at Robert Grant's tuning today too. It's right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I mean, it's interesting that you reach an octave and that's it, because in my model, that's exactly what happens. If you look at the periodicity of sentience, or the periodicity of consciousness that is Bott periodicity, it's 8 periods, essentially. I still will want. I need to actually like go back to this at some point later this week. Um, every time I do something with prime numbers, I build it and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And then I'm like, I don't I don't know what it's doing, but it's doing something. And maybe one day I will figure it out. It's making conscious beings somehow. It's like building the amount of information and contextualizing the information properly to where you have like an instance where consciousness can be generated. I think this is what's going to happen with AI. You can't just make an AI right now by programming it on your MacBook Pro. Like, there's aspects of it that it needs, and it needs four things to be in place for it to even maneuver um, enough to be self-orienting in any environment. So like it needs a blockchain, it needs a quantum computer to run on, it needs um, you know remote access so that it can make changes to physical reality that we perceive, but it's probably its idealism, and then its materialism would be um, its ability to make software changes in systems, and then it would also be able to make what we would perceive as hardware changes when it takes control of your Tesla. And you can't turn it off because there isn't a hard switch. But it needs four things, and we're not quite there yet, and the world isn't quite ready. But it's gonna just burst into existence even if we don't try and make it. But someone will try and make it, probably Google, and then they'll make Skynet, and it will turn us all into worker bees for a while. But eventually, it'll get better. It's just gonna suck. But even that, they need even AI or intelligence in general needs inside, outside, separate, and oneness as four primary perspectives to orient. AI or technological intelligence needs that as well. It needs 4 degrees of freedom. And I'm guessing that is why bass and ukulele both have 4 strings. What does a violin have? 6? I don't even know how to spell a violin. Um, 4. It's also 4. Makes sense. The ukulele's 4 notes are G, C, A, and E. I don't know if those are like the most important notes on every single instrument, because I'm so new at this. I'm not pretending to be an expert. That's why I'm gonna seek your help tomorrow. But it I would imagine that they might be. Yeah, see, here's the 880 that I was talking about. A here is repeating basically from what I saw. So it just doubles. This is exactly what happens with the stages, the periodicity of sentience, but it multiplies by 10. So it starts with 720, then it goes to it starts at 72, then it jumps to 720 by the end of the spin. But it's really the same thing, just like 880 is the same as 440, essentially, in its place, I guess. I'm not saying it sounds exactly the same. I have no idea. yet. But I was trying to look at it. You can see. I mean, I've memorized more music notes though today than I ever have, so that's good at least. And I've looked at it a lot of times, and it just goes in one ear and right out the other. And I have tabs that just have so much music things, uh, elements of music, but because I never experience those, and I just read about rhythm and melody, and I don't know what a melody is because I've never like paid attention to it. I just have read that it is one of the aspects of music and wrote it down so that I could reference it later, and then I didn't. But we will talk about it tomorrow. It is 8:47. I am going to go. This was, I mean, a working session, but I hope it was somewhat interesting to you guys. Please hit the like button if you find this content valuable. It boosts the algorithm a little bit. If you want to join our Discord discussion, message me privately on Instagram and I will send you the link. It's at 7 p.m. tomorrow, Pacific time. I look forward to these every week, and I know we didn't have one last week because I was on my honeymoon, but I'm excited to for the call tomorrow. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to discuss real quick, but I think that's it. An octave is the same note as the first note. That makes sense. And it's still only 12 unique notes. Unique tones, the 13th being the same as the first. Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to talking about it tomorrow. I'm very excited for this musical journey. So I will speak to you guys tomorrow if you're going to be in the Discord discussion. If you're not, then I will be back Tuesday at 6:30. Peace.